Can Utah football recruiting keep up with the SEC and the Big Ten in the NIL era? That's what we're going to be discussing on today's Locked On Utes.
You are Locked On Utes, your daily podcast on the Utah Utes. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for making Locked On Utes your first listen every single day. We are available on all platforms, including YouTube and wherever you may get your podcasts. This is Locked On Utes, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Thank you for making us your first listen of the day. If you're interested in a second listen, you can check out Locked On Big 12, Locked On College Football. We got fall camps going on right now, so there is a lot to cover across the sport. Today's episode of Locked On Utes is brought to you by our great friends at FanDuel. And with FanDuel, you can make every moment more. As the playoffs wind down, the sport stops sporting like we want them to. But this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone every day, all summer long. You can visit FanDuel.com to get started. My name is JT Wistrcill, former intern inside the University of Utah Athletic Department. And I'm excited to have a special guest on today's show in Josh Newman, former Utah beat writer who now works for LoneStarLive.com. Josh, great having you here. And one thing that I was really excited to talk with you about is the growing recruiting gap. And I mean, we could just say the growing gap in college football. Utah in the Big 12. You now cover Texas, one of the teams in the SEC, and the SEC and the Big 10 in general. They're really starting to separate. And we've kind of known for a little bit with the amount of revenue from the TV deals. And it just feels like the SEC and the Big 10 is where you want to be. And that separation is starting to occur statistically, especially when you look at the recruiting gap. When you look at the Big 12, there are 0 Big 12 schools in the top 20 of 24/7 sports team rankings for the class of 2025. Now, some people could say, hey, you still have time to make up that gap. That's true. But if we rewind back to the 2024 class, there was one Big 12 school with a top 30 recruiting ranking in the class of 2024. So this gap is only growing. And for Utah, it's going to be as important ever for them to recruit and develop at a high level because they're just going to land less and less 4 stars in today's era of college football.
Yeah, look, I mean, it's not like Utah was landing like every 4-star kid that they wanted anyway before all the NIL stuff. I mean, their bread and butter, especially under Kyle Whittingham, especially as time has gone on, has essentially been the 3-star kid, the high 3-star kid, the under-recruited 3-star kid that maybe fell through the cracks a little bit. And, you know, either Kyle or Andy Ludwig or Morgan Scalley or whoever sort of identified those types of kids as guys that they could bring in and develop and be a 3-year guy, 4-year guy. And I don't know that Utah's recruiting philosophy has to change all that much. I still think their bread and butter is going to be the 3-star kid, the under-recruited kid. But the landscape sort of changes drastically here with NIL because, you know, you're able to pay players now. And even those guys that we're talking about here, right, the under-recruited, the 3-star kid, those guys want to get paid too. And it took Utah a little while to level up in terms of their NIL resources and what they're able to pay and, you know, the collectives and the nature of what the collectives do. So they've still got a ways to go there, I think, from what I understand, but they've leveled up somewhat. So I don't know. I don't know that so much changes from the Utah perspective, but to your point, if you look at the recruiting rankings, especially at the top, there is a gap and the gap's only going to get bigger. And I remember, I think it was, I don't know, before one of the USC games, either last season or 2 years ago, we were talking to Kyle and we were talking about it. You know what? I think it was Lincoln Riley's first year, right, when Caleb Williams had come in and they brought in a bunch of guys and they were competitive immediately. And we were talking about NIL and resources. And I'm paraphrasing Kyle, but he said something to the effect of, at some point, you're going to see, right, the top 25 teams in the polls are essentially going to be the top 25 piles of money. Essentially the most NIL resources, those teams are going to be the most successful. And you just look, as we're talking, I pulled up the 24/7 sports rankings for the 2025 class. Ohio State, Alabama, Georgia, LSU, Oregon, Notre Dame. These are places with a ton of resources and a ton of money, and they jumped on the collective train immediately. So look, this is where it's going. And look, it's not a surprise to see these teams at the top of the rankings, but it does show that the teams with the resources and the teams that have bought in fully to the current landscape are successful now, and they're going to be successful later the way things are trending.
is trending that way. And, you mentioned just the top piles of money towards the top. You're in Texas now, so I know Texas A&M can't wait for that day for that to be the case as they continue to churn through and pay out a guy like Jimbo Fisher while also giving money to other schools. But you're absolutely right. What we touched on is Utah. The reason they were even able to beat a USC and Oregon when there already was a recruiting gap is because they found Devin Lloyd. They found Brant Keithy. They capitalized on quality transfers like a Cam Rising, who was originally at Texas all the way back. So that is just going to be what's most important for Utah, is continuing to find and develop their guys, because I even think about some of the past 4 stars they've gotten in just prior years. And I feel like some of those guys, it's like I could go to like a big school or I could go to Utah and play right away. But now it's like, well, I can go to that big school and get like double in some cases, potentially, like the NIL. Right. And I have to sit for 1 year. Like, I just think more guys are going to be more willing to do that now. So it is going to be very interesting and important for Utah, whether it is Kyle Whittingham for how long or Morgan Scalley during this process. And Josh, I'm curious for you, now that you've had this time to cover Texas and you've covered Utah, and Texas is tough because we mentioned the top of, like, Texas is the top of the top in programs, but what are some of the bigger contrasts you've seen in between even Texas facilities just compared to Utah, a school that Texas has beaten out Utah for a lot of recent recruits?
Yeah. It's interesting. I showed up here. I'd never been to Austin. I'd never been to the University of Texas. So in my mind, I sort of was expecting to be blown away by the facilities. Mm-hmm. And it's not like that really here, at least not right now. Like, Texas is starting to build, right? They're going to put a shovel in the ground here soon on a new indoor football facility. They're starting to work on the outdoor facility, but the facilities here do not blow you away. Like, the outdoor practice field at Texas, they have to get on a school bus and go from the locker rooms, go 3 blocks, and it's under a major highway almost. Like, the outdoor fields, there's a indoor practice bubble next to it, but you're not blown away by the facilities. DKR Stadium, which is their home stadium, JT. It's kind of this iconic cathedral sort of venue. They've done a lot of building, a lot of expansion. They're still working on things, but it's not like this new modern Marvel type of stadium on campus. Certainly not. But I think the one thing that sort of I think about, and that's pretty obvious, is just in general. So there's it's Power 4 football now, but previously it was Power 5, and it's okay, we sort of lump all of these Power 5 teams, Power 4 teams together in that group. But what I found is there is Power 4 football, and then there's Power 4 football. Texas is a high-powered machine in terms of resources and money. Look, they just gave Steve Sarkisian, the head coach, a gigantic pay raise. He's making something, I think his base for this year now is 10.3 or 10.5, coming off a trip to the college football playoff. They lack for nothing. There was a time during the offseason after the Sugar Bowl, right? They lost in a CFP semifinal. They had their top 2 receivers, underclassmen, left for the NFL draft. Their number 3 guy was a senior, so he was going to the draft anyway. And you sort of looked up in mid-January, and your wide receiver room was pretty empty. So within a week, Steve Sarkisian had hit the portal for Isaiah Bond from Alabama and Matthew Golden from Houston and Silas Bolden from Oregon State, which a lot of Utah fans should know that name. So just on a dime, the wide receiver room was empty, and they were able to leverage the NIL and the resources to restock the room. Now, they've hit a bit of a recruiting lull here. They whiffed on a couple of guys. They lost on a few recruiting battles. But what their recruiting losses look like are different than what Utah's recruiting losses look like, because Texas is going to lose out on a 4-star kid, a 5-star kid, but there is still a line of other 4-stars and other 5-stars that they're just going to go on down the line at Texas. If Utah loses 3-4 guys like that, it's a bit of a problem. It's not so much of a problem in Texas. So, it's been pretty striking to me so far. The difference is okay, we're all Power 4 football, but there's Power 4 football at Utah and there's Power 4 football at Texas, and it's a completely different animal here, I think.
That is a different. I mean, for example, too, when we're talking specifically about Texas, I believe they won the Learfield Cup, correct? Like for the top overall.
Yeah.
Like when you factor in all athletics together, their success, Texas even like beat out like a Stanford, who's normally lives on the top of that for the swimming and some of those other ones.
Yeah, Texas, I mean, right, that's a great point, right? They won the Learfield Cup, and for the people that don't know, the Learfield Cup measures the top athletic department as a whole, not just football. So at Texas, they won the national championship in rowing and women's volleyball. The softball team went to the women's college World Series finals against Oklahoma. You know, the women's basketball team went to the Elite Eight. The men's basketball team won an NCAA tournament game. So on down the line, and you know, this is it's a large athletic department with a lot of resources. They brought in something like, I don't know, they were in the black like 260 or 270 million odd dollars for the last fiscal year. So it's a completely different animal here. And like, you know, from a personal standpoint, like I'm looking forward to a football season, and I'm looking forward to like experiencing a football weekend here. Look, Georgia comes here on October 19th. That's a major college football, not just a game, that's an event. Like Georgia, Texas, that's an event. So, yeah, very much looking forward to diving into a football season here finally.
It's going to be a lot of fun to see what Texas looks like this year.
Yeah.
But I do want to get your thoughts on this Utah team, as if you still covered Utah. I want to get a few of your particular thoughts on the questions you would have about this team and all the things we've been hearing about Kyle Whittingham's future. We're going to be diving into that a little bit deeper in one moment. But first, we got to talk a little bit more about our great friends at FanDuel. I love sports, and I love them so much, I never want them to stop. But as the playoffs wind down, we get fewer and fewer games. And the sports, they're just not sporting like I want them to. But FanDuel lets me keep the sports going whenever I want. All I have to do is open the app and dream up bets anytime I'm in the mood. And this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right, there's something for everyone every day, all summer long. MLB season is in full swing, but college football season is right around the corner. Who do you think is going to win the Big 10, the Big 12, the SEC? All of those bets available now at FanDuel as we get closer and closer to college football as well as NFL football being back. Make sure you guys head over to FanDuel.com and start making the most out of your summer. FanDuel, an official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball. All right, Josh, I want to know from you personally, what would be your biggest question that you were looking at for this Utah football team? I've talked a lot about how I feel about the offensive line. There's some things there. I want to see how that clicks. But as you look at Utah going into this year, what would be the biggest question you would have?
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest question is Cam Rising and the health of Cam Rising. Look, we all know, excuse me, about the severe knee injury on, you know, what was it, January 2nd, 2023, in that Rose Bowl loss against Penn State. You know, will he play? Won't he play? Will he play? Won't he play? Was kind of the theme of the first 4 weeks, 6 weeks of last season. Obviously didn't play. From what I see and what I read, you know, he went through spring and he's healthy and he's gonna be ready to go. And I think there's an assumption, at least from some people, that either he's going to pick up right where he left off, or there's just going to be no hiccups at all. But you have to like take a breath, and you have to remember that he hasn't played in a football game since January of 23. So you're talking, you know, 20 months by the time he actually takes a snap in the opener against Southern Utah. So you have to relax a little bit and just remember that he hasn't taken a snap. And he hasn't taken a snap. He hasn't faced a pass rush. He hasn't been hit. So there's going to be some rust that has to get knocked off. I think that's the biggest question that people need to keep in mind. But yeah, just, you know, generally speaking, yeah, I think that, you know, look, the health of Rising is paramount in terms of what Utah is able to do this year. Because if you have Rising and everybody else is healthy, but, you know, specifically Rising, you know, and I used to say this and write this when I was covering Utah, when Rising was out there and like playing his game, like anything felt possible. And anything was possible, right? They won the Pac-12 twice. They went to the Rose Bowl twice. When Rising is out there and he's healthy and he's engaged and he's slinging it, anything feels possible for Utah if Rising is healthy.
Yeah, and look, first on the Rising point, I mean, when talk about he hasn't played, I just thought about this because we talked about it's all the way January 2023. Tom Brady has played in a game more recently than Cam Rising has. That's like a live game. That's just a crazy fact that's true of how long it's been. And something else that's fascinating, Josh, is Kyle Whittingham might be coaching his last season. It's been very interesting to watch the comments he's made. He was asked specifically at Big 12 Media Days about his future by one reporter and said like, oh, I'm taking my time. We'll see where it all goes. Sure. And then at the end, he's asked like, oh, what do you think about Vegas? And that's when he drops I'm not sure I'll be here in 2027 when that game is here. I've talked about it a few times that just Kyle Whittingham to me doesn't seem like the type of guy who prolongs his retirement in terms of like saying, he said he's day by day on Jim Rome's show. Like, I just would think when you factor in that the players Utah's losing after this year, I personally believe this will be his last season. When you look at the comments he's made, not wanting to coach past 65 and he'll turn 65 this year, how do you project his future as leading this Utah football program?
Yeah, I used to milk that to death, right? I think he told, might have been like Chris Camrani from The Athletic. We're talking like years ago, like 18 or 19, that like he wouldn't coach past 65. So like that was the marker that was out there. Now he's tried to walk that notion back that he's not going to coach past 65. Look, I might not be the right person to ask this question because I remember, I thought he was going to walk away in 2021. I thought he was dropping like Easter eggs all over the place about how his career was coming to an end. You think about what 2021 was, right? You were coming off the pandemic season and all of the stress and the issues that went along with that, compounded by Ty Jordan's death, compounded by Aaron Lowe's death. And I really thought that he was going to walk away. And clearly he didn't. Now, his company line at the time was, I feel good, I'm healthy, I'm energetic, I want to keep doing this. And to your point, Big 12 Media Day or Jim Rome show, he's saying he's day to day. I know that somebody, as you said, somebody asked him about the 27 opener against Miami in Vegas, which made some news before Big 12 Media Day. And Kyle said what he said, he's probably not going to be there. This is the thing. His contract goes through 2027, which if I remember correctly, I think that takes him to 68 or 69 years old. I don't think he's going to coach through the end of the contract. I don't think he'll be there for the 27 opener. I think he's going to walk away before the end of the contract. Now, look, there's a lot of money that you'd be leaving on the table if you don't coach through the end of the contract. And look, don't discount the fact that there's more generational wealth to be made. Okay, he's got a bunch of kids. His kids have kids. There's a lot of family. You want to make sure your family is set up for a long time. Fine, I get all that. But again, just based on comments and reading and watching, I don't think he coaches through the end of the contract. And yeah, we can all sort of read into the timing of announcing that Morgan Scalley is again, the head coach in waiting. That would seem to be an indication that the end was near. Maybe not. I always kind of felt like this is Kyle. I always felt that Kyle thought that he had a team that was close to the college football playoff. The 2019 team, was on the doorstep, right? They lose the Pac-12 championship game to Oregon. They get left out. You get to a couple of Rose Bowls. So I think that he thinks that they're close. Now it's a 12-team playoff. The door to get to the playoff tournament is much wider open now at 12 teams. You have Rising, you have Brant Keithy, Mekhi Bernard is back. Your offensive line should be solid. There's a lot of reasons to think that Utah can get to the college football playoff now when it's 12 teams. If they get there, does he walk away? Yeah, maybe. I mean, it would make a lot of sense, right? Like you get to he always said that, we got to the pinnacle, right? We won the Pac-12. We got to a Rose Bowl. Like that was the pinnacle for a Pac-12 team. Well, that goalpost, so to speak, has sort of changed because you probably have a team that can win your Power Four conference and get to the college football playoff. So, we'll see. But, bottom line, I think my overarching point here is I don't think he coaches through the end of the contract. Does that mean this year? Does that mean next year? I don't know. But I don't think he's coaching in 2027.
Also really intrigued by the fact that those players you all mentioned are leaving. Brant Keithy, Cam Rising, Mekhi Bernard, and a few Junior Tafuna. I expect this to be his last as well. that group of players that he's experienced so much success with. Next year could be a retooling year, depending on how some of those players end up fitting in. So that's where it will be really interesting to see if he wants to stick around with that. If Cam did have another year of extra ability, and he does not. We've done this enough now. It's been a wild ride with Cam, but this will be it for him. So it's going to be a fascinating saga to watch play out, but we don't have to worry about that till after 2024. And this 2024 season, Josh, figures to be one to remember for Utah. The schedule lines up like the 2019 one. Maybe they only played one ranked team in that 2019 season. Maybe they'll play 2 or 3, depending on how some of those, like Oklahoma State should definitely be. That's the only game I look at on Utah's schedule, and I'm like, they won't probably be favored in that game. Almost every other game, I think they will be. Maybe Arizona, but with the losses they sustained, I'm still very unsure how that team's going to be. So clears the way for Utah to make the Big 12. They make the Big 12 title game and win that, then they will go to the college football playoff and do those things that Kyle Whittingham has set out to do for so long. Do you foresee a historic season for Utah on the horizon?
Yeah, it's hard to, and look, preseason polls are largely subjective. Okay. Mm-hmm. It's an opinion. They don't mean much of anything. I think at most a preseason poll is at least like an indication of what the coaches think of given teams or what the media thinks of given teams. It doesn't mean anything. Okay. It's very subjective. That said, you've got Rising back. If it is a modicum of what he was, that's a huge boon for Utah. If he's healthy and can stay healthy. Keithy was your top pass catcher for a couple of years. He's missed a bunch of time. He's back. Mekhi Bernard, if he can stay healthy, look, he's had a lot of injuries in his career. When he's healthy, he's awesome, but he's had a lot of injuries. Look, offensive line, you're solid. Can Dorian Singer sort of like recapture what he was for Arizona in 2022, right? He had a down year for USC in 2023. There's a lot of reasons personnel-wise to believe that Utah, can win the Big 12, or should at least be the Big 12 favorite. You're sort of looking around the Big 12 at everybody else. It's like, I don't know that any team is like blowing you away. Utah doesn't have to play Kansas State, doesn't have to play Kansas. I think that's huge. You have to go to Stillwater early to play Oklahoma State. I agree with you. I think that Oklahoma State would be the betting favorite in such a game. One thing, and I've talked about this with, some other people, like, yeah, you can look at the schedule and you can sort of talk yourself into it lines up well for Utah. But listen, again, maybe you're better than Oklahoma State, but you have to go to Stillwater. Like, you have to deal with that environment. Like, that's a tough road environment that you have to deal with. You have to go to, look, you're better than Central Florida, but you have to go to UCF, and that's going to be a weird itinerary. Okay. So that's an East Coast game, 2 time zones away. So Utah is going to travel on Thanksgiving Eve, spend Thanksgiving on the road in Orlando, and then play the game on Friday. That's a weird set of circumstances that you sort of have to deal with. And maybe there's a mental hurdle for some of these kids that you're going to have to fight through. So look, should Utah win the Big 12? Like, yeah, it probably lines up that way. And if I'm like sitting here now, like talking it out, like, yeah, they're probably the favorite. And if I had a vote, I would have voted Utah as the favorite, but you still have to go play this schedule. Yeah. Now, I think another part of this is, if you win the Big 12, you're going to the college football playoff and you're getting a first round bye, you're a top 4 seed. I don't know that the Big 12 is strong enough to get a second team in. They might only get their champion in. Like, you start looking at the SEC, yeah, 4 or 5 teams are really capable. You look at the Big 10, there's probably 4 teams there. Does the SEC get does the ACC get a second team in other than their champion? Some combination of Clemson, Florida State, Miami. Does Notre Dame, get a spot as an independent? So I don't know that the Big 12 is going to get a second team in. And if they're not going to get a second team in, you really need to win the Big 12 championship game. The margin of error for Utah in terms of the conference schedule and, getting to the championship game, winning championship game, the margin of error is very, very slim, I think.
It's extremely slim. When you have only going to have so many ranked wins on your schedule, more than likely. Right. I mean, a win against BYU is good for out here, but it doesn't, at the end of the day, if they're not ranked and they only have the 4 wins, 5 wins they're projected to get, that's not going to mean much to that committee room. So it's going to be really fascinating to watch that play out. And the one thing I'll say about the UCF game, which you'll remember from when Utah last went out to Florida, Josh, is it's a good thing that game is in late November and not in late August, because that was the worst tackling display I've ever seen by this Utah defense.
Yeah, I was at SEC Media Days, what was that, last week or 2 weeks ago, and I was talking to one of the Florida beat writers, Nick Delatorre from 24/7 Sports, and we were like reminiscing about the Utah-Florida game. And I remember like walking out of the swamp late that night thinking that like Anthony Richardson looked like Randall Cunningham and they're going to win 9 games. And it's like, no, that was not a good football team. And, we were talking about the missed tackles and the whole thing and, Rising, driving them down to the 6 and throwing the pick. But yeah, I think I'd rather be in Florida in late November as opposed to late August. I'm sure it's going to be more pleasant.
Yeah, that's the hope in the process. And it'll also be a more pleasant late November in Texas, where you currently are, rather than in August, I'm sure, Josh. But always appreciate you stopping by. Tell everyone what you have going on ahead of this big football season.
Yeah, man. As you said, I'm covering Texas now for LoneStarLive.com. Camp starts next Wednesday, July 31st. So if anyone's interested in Texas or SEC coverage, Twitter handle is still at Joshua_Newman. All my stuff is at LoneStarLive.com.
Josh, thanks again for joining us.
Of course, man. Appreciate it.
That's going to do it for today's edition of Locked On Utes. We'll be back with you soon, talking more things from Camp Kyle.